Welcome to the Beauty Amidst the Ashes podcast, featuring stories and conversations designed to equip, encourage, and mobilize the church and families to engage in adoption and caring for children that need families. I'm your host, Carl Christensen, with Beauty Amidst the Ashes. This is our development coordinator, Peggy Porter. We're going to be your host for the podcast. If you're watching this podcast, you're either on YouTube or you're listening via Spotify or maybe on iTunes, and we want to thank you for joining us today.
Our special guests today are Kirbie and Trey Seiser, who are currently navigating an open adoption and have 3 boys and have domestically adopted their second child. Can you tell me a little bit more about your story?
Yeah, sure. So we started the adoption process officially in January of 2017, but the conversation started well before that. We started right after we were married, just on a whim. Was on Facebook scrolling and found a family that had grown through adoption, and it just sparked something in my heart. And I had asked Trey if he was interested in adopting or if he would ever consider it, and he pretty much shut me down.
More politely than that.
Yeah, he
wasn't ready at the time.
Yeah, he said if we can have, if we can't have children biologically, then we could maybe pursue adoption. But that kind of was the end of the conversation there. We got pregnant about a year after that, had our first child, Theo, in July of 2015. And 5 days after Theo was born, I was diagnosed with postpartum cardiomyopathy, which is heart failure, which is induced by pregnancy. And that shook us totally. And they pretty much told us not to pursue another pregnancy, that there was no way to know whether my heart would improve. It was functioning at 50% of what it should be.
Mm-hmm. This was 5 days after our first, coming out of the hospital with Theo. And so it was a bucket of cold water for me.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
They said,
Sobering.
don't have any more children. And we wanted several children. So just kind of navigated through that. It was a really there's a lot of turmoil going on in our life right now with our living situation. We had just sold our house and we're living with Trey's parents, and then the heart diagnosis and moving to a new place. It just was a lot. So adoption wasn't like really the forefront then, but shortly after, it was like 7 months later that I grieved the loss of having more biological children, and God sparked, kind of reminded me that adoption was a beautiful way to grow a family, and I started researching and just became totally obsessed.
She did.
I talked about it all the time.
Let me stop you right there. So, Trey, tell us a little bit about when did you have that heart change?
When along with Kirbie's timeline there, it was probably right around that same 6-7 months after, and when I could see that she was kind of going through the final grieving process of that. Like you worded, the loss of not having more future kids. But when the conversation was reignited by Kirbie, it sparked it again in me, and then it really brought back what happened the week after the pregnancy, and it really made me realize that had to happen in order for me to get on board almost. And
You went to the doctor with me.
yeah, I should. Yeah, I right at first I wasn't. In that time span, I still wasn't there.
You kind of were like,
I was in
God's going to heal.
I was in denial, I think, definitely, with her heart condition. I just kind of thought, like, it's going to work itself out. And then she had gone to several doctor's appointments, where she came home with that conversation to me that she had with doctors, but I never was there yet. And so I finally went to one myself, and it was just in that room with the doctor, hearing him just say it like it was no big deal.
Yeah.
Where it was
like, don't do it. Basically, don't have another baby. There's no way to know whether you'll even survive a pregnancy. They painted a really grim picture of what that would look like, and that was really scary. Yeah. So we kind of both were on the same page. That appointment, I think, was in May, and so that was when we finally were on the same page and were openly communicating about planning to pursue an adoption. And about a month prior to that, we had I had an opportunity. I was staying home with our son, and I had an opportunity to start working from home and making some income, because the most overwhelming thing for us in our research for adoption was the cost, as it is for probably most people. We were really overwhelmed by how we would even make that work, and started saving right away.
Which feels like the initial closed door when you look
Absolutely.
into adoption. You're like, nope, that's not
Can't
for me.
do it. Yeah. Totally. Totally. So so that was an answered prayer. And then just weird, I don't know, people call them God winks or whatever. Situations would come up. We got a random check in the mail, or cash, it was cash, from an acquaintance that went to the same church that we went to when we lived in the city we lived in before the city we were in then. I don't even know how they knew we were adopting. We hadn't announced it yet. But they sent us cash in the mail saying, hey, we heard you're pursuing adoption. We want to support you. It was like $200. And we were like, how do you even know? And it just things like that kept happening.
I think it's really neat too. Like when God calls us to something, you know, we take that step of obedience and we step out and say, okay, God, I trust you. You know, God's word tells us that, you know, to walk by faith and not by sight. You know, and it's hard to take that step of faith when you can't see the end result.
Feels very impossible.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. You know, what was God teaching you, and what was He doing in your heart through that process of just, okay, you took that first step of saying, yes, we are going to pursue adoption. You know, we're looking for an agency. What's God doing in your heart?
It was kind of some of those instances like Kirbie was just talking about with getting that money from support from somebody you don't even know. It's kind of, that was the initial thing for me of like, if you're looking for an opportunity, you're more likely to see an opportunity if you're looking for one. Yeah. At first it's like a closed door, but then once you start seeing that, you know, there's other things at work here rather than just yourself, then it's re-encouraging, I guess, and reinforcing to push through. Yeah.
I think we were talking about this on the way here, just what God was teaching us through each season of the process. And for me, I've even post-adoption, we're 2 years post-adoption now, and it's a constant self-reflecting for me, like constantly thinking about how God's working in you and through you, and self-reflecting on different things that you do and why you do them, and what your purpose is behind. Like, for example, when we were with our agency, they are a very self-matching agency. They encourage you to promote a Facebook page, and that is ultimately how we connected with our son's birth mom. And we can maybe talk about that more later if you want to, but it was very much like post, you know, about your life on social media and share your story with anyone who will listen, because you never know who is in a situation where they're facing an unplanned pregnancy and they want to pursue adoption. So in choosing what to post, you're very like, okay, am I posting this so that an expectant mom will see it and think I'm really cool and want to pick me? Or am I posting an accurate representation of what my life is? Yeah. And adoption for me has been that constantly, thinking about why I'm doing what I'm doing and who's being served by it. Does that make sense?
Through that an open adoption relationship, you know, and how you do that, is that kind of your, you know, just really self-evaluating how you're portraying what you're really going through?
Yes. And like, am I being honest, or am I shielding myself from an uncomfortable situation because I'm being selfish, or because that's what's best for my child? Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
Am I
flowering this up to make it look like things are
because vulnerability isn't pretty all the time.
No.
You know, when you're vulnerable, sometimes it can get a little messy.
Am I just posting this to make it look like I have my stuff together?
Yeah.
Or
so someone will pick me, so someone will choose me to parent their child. Right. And that's something that God's continuing to teach me personally. Am I doing this for His glory or for my own?
The biggest thing teaching-wise, but that I realized, and I mentioned this at the BATA conference, was control, the feeling of control. And like being the husband, the dad, generally you feel like you have to have control, and that's just a human nature too. And so being able to let go of that sort of control and letting things happen the way they're going to happen, and just being open to every opportunity that comes up during the adoption has really been life-changing for me.
Yeah.
So going back to kind of like you guys choosing your agency and picking that, when you chose open adoption, was that always just initially what you wanted to do, was open adoption? Or did you think about it? Did you discuss it? How did that kind of conversation go?
Yeah, we always wanted an open adoption. In fact, there were a handful of situations that came through our agency that wanted closed adoptions. The expectant mom had said, I don't want contact or limited contact. And we intentionally did not present to those situations because we wanted, of course, there's no guarantee. Relationships ebb and flow always in every circumstance, including adoption. But we wanted at least the opportunity to have a relationship with our child's biological family. And that came from a lot of research up front.
I was going to say, I will say that at first I didn't really even understand what open adoption was. I initially, and even leading into the conversation of adoption the first time, which is why I was probably more against it, was I just had the stereotypical, Hollywood portrayal of what adoption is, and the nightmare that they make it seem like in some movies and things. But Kirbie did a ton of research, and she really educated me on open adoption, and I was just kind of taken back by that's actually a thing. Like, you can actually be that vulnerable.
Did you feel like your initial no or maybe closed door to Kirbie suggesting it was because you didn't have enough information or wasn't aware of what it was really like?
Definitely. And that goes back to my denial of even understanding what it was all about. It wasn't. It was way bigger than myself. And at the time, that was my husband. A selfish comment of mine.
For sure.
You don't know what you don't know, right? Yeah. I keep hearing that.
And sometimes you don't know until you're in it. You can't. You think you researched it, and then you're like, "Whoa!"
Every situation is so different. Every story is so different, and it's valuable to hear people's perspectives while also holding an open hand to knowing yours probably won't look like that, or if it does, there's going to be differences because every couple is different, every child is different, every expectant family is different.
Every birth mom is different.
Yeah. So I did a ton of research initially. Ashley Mitchell was one. We actually, the first BATA conference that we went to, she was the speaker. And ever since then, I've been following her and loving her perspective and so thankful for what she shares. And I love what she says about, like, take what applies to you and leave the rest, because not everything is going to apply to every person. And that has been such a valuable piece of information for me to cling on to.
That's the most powerful thing about adoption, I think, too, is you're not just a system. You're not just you're talking about a soul and a relationship and a process and a journey. And it's just, you have to learn, but you don't have a mold to go by. And that's kind of
is very hard for me because I want there to be like a how-to.
Yeah, we all do.
I want it to be like, this is all the things to do to have a successful open relationship.
Yes.
But there isn't that. And on one hand, I'm thankful for that because,
One thing I know too, and just in talking with you both, you guys really have a heart for honoring the birth mom. And I know that spoke a lot to me, being adopted, and now having a relationship with my birth mom. And I think that's so awesome. Adoption is created out of brokenness. And one of the most powerful things that my birth mom, said to me was, I know what it was like for God the Father to give up a son, because that's what I did, with you, and that's part of the beauty of adoption is it is a reflection of the gospel. Let's go back to that. Maybe we have a viewer or a couple watching that's just getting ready to begin that open adoption relationship. What would you say to them as they get ready to walk into that?
I think the first thing is to lay down your expectations at the foot of the cross, because you can't know what you're walking into until you're in it. As much as you prepare, as much as you try to plan, like I said, there is not a how-to. So just be willing to lay it all down. Be willing to be uncomfortable.
Be willing to let go of control. That's what it kind of went back to my thing. My main thing was what shook me the most too about it was just like you don't really know what's coming next. You can just go one step at a time, and
there's no timeline.
And meeting the birth family where they're at too is a big thing.
Huge, yes.
You have all these thoughts about what your relationship's going to look like, but like you said, it's people, and you have no idea what kind of personality each member of your personal triad is going to have. And the chances of you having the exact same personality or the exact same hobbies as your child's biological family is not great. The likelihood of that is not high. So
And it's just a sensitive thing. So there's going to be some awkward.
There's brokenness.
Exactly.
And navigating that brokenness and being, aware of it, but then also, gentle and
Yes.
doing that while you're also going through a little bit of brokenness yourself.
Oh man, it's so much. It's
Just
so
preparing
much.
your heart for the unexpected,
Yeah.
too, and just preparing your heart for being willing to take the step forward rather than being consumed with the fear of what's happening next.
And I think too, always educating yourself. Again, we're 2 years post-placement and I'm still learning so much. And I know that is going to be a lifelong thing, which can sometimes feel daunting and exhausting. Even now there's changes in the verbiage of what's considered appropriate and what's, like before it was when you were chosen by an expectant mom, it was you were matched. And now different agencies are going to different terminologies because match doesn't feel as ethical now as it did. So it's like, man, there's exactly everyone's learning, and it's you have got to have an open heart and an open mind in every single season. And then community is something that we both feel very passionate about in adoption. Like I said, at the very beginning when we started researching, I reached out to literally anybody I could find that I knew, that anyone knew, that could connect me with someone who had adopted. Because learning people's stories is important. And again, you have to hold it with hands open because your story is not going to be their story, but people who have walked before you can share wisdom that you can't learn necessarily from the internet or from, even agencies. Those resources are great and necessary, of course, but firsthand experiences are honestly probably what helped me more than anything. Just knowing what the possibilities are that you could face.
And for you feel like that's the most helpful thing that helped you through the process was stories?
Just relationship buildings, like building, like having personal relationships with families who had adopted.
And not only that community, but at the time when we first started too, we had just started with a small group at our church. And so not only do you have you obviously want your family involved, but having like our church family, a small group of people to confide in and talk to about it, rather than just you and your spouse about what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what's going on between you two, but having a group of people that you can be open with.
So you guys made the decision to adopt. What did your church family say? What did friends and family say about that decision?
Everybody's on board and excited.
I think
skeptical at first. And a lot of very, Hollywood skepticism of what adoption is. They didn't really know either, and so it took some educating. Kirbie more than me, but
even like now. So Tate, our son that we adopted, just turned 2. And for the last, I was gonna say every birthday. So for the last 2 years, Trey's dad has said on his birthday, like he'll say to Tate, "Man, this was the most stressful day of my life. Like waiting to find out if we were gonna meet you." And I think there's still so much to learn for our families too, and continuing to navigate. But
the initial reaction, when we decided to adopt, I would say it was fearful too. Of our family was.
They were afraid that we'd be
us.
taken advantage. They were fearful of the cost. They were fearful of, not knowing what an open adoption relationship looked like.
And that's normal fear.
Totally. And I keep, I've said this several times to our families and to Trey, like, we signed up for this. Yes, they did not. This is not something that they chose. So we need to be gracious with our families if they don't get it, or if they use the wrong language, or if they, you want to educate and help them understand, but, it's normal for them to not be as invested as you are from the get-go.
There again, I think you got to meet them where they're at.
Exactly.
And in helping them understand what it is and what you're going through, and
giving grace in the situation.
Yes, they're very supportive. So we actually just had a visit with Tate's birth family in November, and it was incredible. And our family, so we just took Tate this time, which I was so thankful for, because last time we took the other 2 boys and it was total chaos.
It was not great.
So we drove. It was insane. But this time we only took Tate, and it was such a gift to have that time one-on-one with him, with his family. And our family obviously makes that possible by taking the other 2 kids and praying over the trip and all of that. So they're very supportive in that regard.
And even to today, anything that is related to us being part of the adoption community, they're like, yep, there, we'll watch them. Like today, it was like, parents are just there. You guys go do that.
Yeah.
Do the podcast.
Very supportive. Very thankful for them.
So it's been a good experience. But yes, initially at first it was fear, but it's a
Along
process
those lines,
for them.
as you're giving grace and as you're educating, how would you give maybe advice to somebody, maybe they are struggling with not being able to have kids, infertility, or other health issues? Like, how would you, what advice would you give to a woman who maybe her husband's not on board, or maybe there's a lot of confusion within her family, there's not a lot of support? What advice would you give to her for that? But then also just wanting to educate other people but not come across too strong. I think that most of the time when you're talking to women or wives, and they're like so gung-ho and their heart's all in, and then they go, but I have to again meet them where they are at. How would you advise?
That's a tough one,
like
Peggy.
I know. It's so common though. It's so common.
It is. And I really struggle with that, honestly. Because
I could take it from the husband's perspective first. Give you a little time to think about
I don't know. That's a really hard one.
Just for the husbands out there, or the other spouse that may not be initially bought in, it's just being on the same page with your spouse about what your goals are, or what you want, not goals, but what
We talk a lot about goals.
Sure, no, but
goals
still,
is the time of year too. Goals is in my head, but
For sure.
like back to our situation, we knew we wanted more kids, and we were in the situation we were in, and that's just, yes, that health issue is a part of our story, but in the end, if you want another child, the whole adoption is all about love, and so it's loving that child and whatever comes along with that. You got to buy into that, but it's getting on the same page with your spouse about whatever current situation you might be in. If you want X, then how do you get to the Y?
I think too, just being, and this is something I was not good at, being patient and not pushing. I was pushing, and it was a very challenging time in our marriage. I mean, we're navigating becoming new parents, and we're told that we weren't ever going to be parents again in the same moment. It was like, that is a lot. And then, the shock of that wore off. And I just remember praying for God to soften my heart and Trey's. First was mine. Like, Lord, please soften my heart to whatever your plan is, because if it's one child, I don't want to be bitter. I don't want to be bitter about that. I want to be thankful for the one child that you gave me. And I want to raise him to love you. And I'm going to cry.
Oh, for sure.
But then praying for Trey once, thank you, once my heart was softened, then praying for the Lord to soften his, because I felt certain that we were supposed to adopt, but just because I felt that, I mean, you can't do that by yourself. You have to be on the same page with your husband. You can't, obviously, pursue an adoption without the support of both spouses. So just being patient and offering grace and continuing to educate, while also, this is not answering your question, but
no, it is.
without
it is.
without
for sure
bombarding with information.
It's hard to answer the question of what advice to give somebody with certain health conditions that might be withholding having future for their kids. But I think it all goes back to, like we were just talking about, just being on the same page with your spouse of what that current situation you might be in, and then evaluating how you want to move forward together.
And laying down expectation, because ultimately we have no control over our lives. I mean, we have free will and all of that, but God orchestrates every detail.
I think key is just you focusing on softening your heart, because God had opened the door, adoption is something that my heart is, but then softening it to being well, God's plan is greater and bigger, and softening to his leading, not your leading. I think that's what I'm getting. And once you did that and you prayed for Trey, once you submitted yourself and prayed, then God was gracious and good, and he led in the way that he wanted to lead, and not you.
I like what you said about how God orchestrates every detail. With our organization, it's called Beauty Amidst the Ashes. And here you guys get told that probably never going to be able to have kids. You advise that you're never going to get pregnant. You know, that is a broken time for you, you know, but then God says, no, I'm going to do something amazing and powerful in this. And he begins orchestrating and writing the story, you know, and I don't know in conversations that we had with you guys, there was a lot of questions in that waiting, a lot of, we're getting down this path and then we're turning around and we're going back this way, you know, roadblocks and stuff that would come up. But this whole time, God is just continuing to say, trust me, walk by faith. You guys are remaining faithful. He's writing your story, and he writes beautiful stories. And the whole time, you know, I'm just sitting here thinking about the verse that says, you know, you formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And that whole time in that waiting, God is doing this with Tate. You know, and he begins that process of creating Tate, you know. And there's many families that are watching right now or listening to this right now who are there. They're like, we're in this adoption process. We've had a failed adoption. We're battling infertility. We want to have kids. We have that desire to have kids. Whatever it may be, that need to hear from a couple that was there. So what would you say to them right now if they're watching? What would you say to that couple that's in that waiting? What did God teach you in that waiting?
There's purpose. If it's not happening right now, what can you do to work towards being a better parent when the time comes for you to be a parent? Investing in your marriage, investing in your spouse, investing in your relationship with Christ above all. That's what I would say.
I did not have this perspective when we were waiting. I mean, it was tough waiting for us. But during our waiting, our pastor at the time had told me that, he reinforced to me that God puts things in your life what you need to have in that moment. Or he puts you in the situation that you need to be in that moment to learn from it. And so my advice would be that, you know, God's written your story. You just haven't gotten to that chapter yet. Everything that you're going through is supposed to be part of what you're going through.
And I think hearing that, we go, okay, yeah, but when you reflect back, I mean, regardless of whatever your life has given to you, you go back and you go, that was for a reason. I learned this, or I changed my, you know, path and I went here instead of there. You know, you in the moment, you don't think that there's a purpose and there's a time for this season. But then when you go back, you're like, I'm thankful for that season. Clearly. That was so needed in my life. And I think that's powerful.
Well, and if you think about it too, like, we were presented with, I can't remember the number now, over 20 expectant moms over the course of the 6-month period that we were waiting with our agency. If another one of those expectant moms had chosen us,
your trajectory changes completely. Yeah,
we wouldn't have Tate. Or if I mean, just so many possibilities and so many details. It's
now
just,
you can see the goodness.
Yeah, and that's why I started it off with I didn't have that perspective, at least until after it happened, and that's what it is. It feels good to be able to give that kind of advice after the fact to families that are in the waiting season. That once it clicks for you, once that moment happens, it's almost like an epiphany. It's just like it's all. Unless you reflect on everything you just went through. For as you're holding that child in your hands.
But it also feels so cliche when you're the waiting family hearing that. And I get
It
that.
does. It
I
really
get
does.
that because everybody says, oh, it's going to be so worth it. And it is. I'm saying it will be worth it, but it's so hard to wait.
Hard.
And I know that.
So let's talk about that. You guys get a phone call, preparing to meet Tate, seeing Tate for the first time. Share a little bit about that. Kleenex boxes.
More tears. Yay.
I could start it off too with it. So we were in month 6 or 5, 6 months, I think, of waiting, which felt like an eternity. But there's people out there that have it longer. And so, but we were just discussing some of the situations we just had went through, and we get this phone call. I'm pumping gas at our local gas station. Kirbie gets this phone call, and it happens to be from Tate's birth grandmother. And so it was. I wasn't on the phone call, but Penny just calls her and she says, "Hey, I saw an ad on Facebook."
Yeah.
that
We didn't even post it. A friend of mine
it
from
was a shared
Oregon
post.
posted on our behalf.
And that's
it
how
was,
God orchestrates.
I
Exactly.
mean,
That's
insane. Yeah. So she called and said, "Hey, we saw, are you still wanting to adopt? There's a baby due in 6 weeks. Well, I think it was 8 weeks. It's a boy." Shared some of the details. They asked why we were adopting, just a few questions. And I was shaking.
Yeah.
Every time my phone rang for that 6-month period, I was like, oh my gosh, is this it?
I'm
Is
pretty
this
sure
it?
I was out pumping gas, and
Yeah.
then I get back in the car, and she's
I'm
like
like,
on the phone, and she's like,
What a moment.
talking to a
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked with her for a few minutes, got her in contact with our agency. Our agency met with her, and she officially chose us. It was insane because we were talking to a couple of other expectant moms also at that time. So navigating all of that was a lot. But so they officially chose us at the end of October, and we flew out to meet them. They wanted to meet us before the baby was born. So we flew out to meet them the first week of November and spent 36 hours with them.
So it's prior to him being born.
Yes. Yes.
We took a trip to go and meet them.
That's great.
And so that was a little bit taboo for me at first when Kirbie mentioned that she wanted to do that. But just that was probably my first experience of letting go of the reins
Uncomfortable.
and being uncomfortable and saying, all right, we'll see what happens. I'm going to let go of control a little bit and see what happens.
So we flew out there in South Carolina. We got to meet the ladies with our agency, which is a huge blessing to get to have that relationship built.
Which is crazy. Shared in Oregon. They were in South Carolina.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. It's
Through
the same thing
Facebook.
with my story, through the friend of a friend of a friend
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Totally.
Wow.
Totally.
Yeah.
So flew out there, spent 36 hours with them, just like it was just insane. I was so nervous. We got off the plane and I'm like sobbing as we get into the truck that Trey rented. That's a whole nother story.
I
Sobbing
don't
the whole
rent
way.
the cars anymore.
Long story short, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's another story for another day. But cried the whole way there. Just what if she hates me? What if she thinks I'm weird? What if this is awful? They invite us into their house, and I like, Lord, please don't let me cry. Don't let her think I'm weird because I want to hug her. Just so many things. So I asked if I could hug her right away, and she hugged me, and I started crying again. So that was just the first initial. We got to meet his biological mom, his biological dad, and then his grandma, just his grandma at that time. And spent about an hour there, and then we went out to lunch and just asked it was like a first date kind of, like you're just asking like, what's your favorite color? What kind of things do you like to do? What's your dream job? Like I just love finding out those types of things about people anyway. And that time was just really, really special. I wrote down every single detail, hoping that I would get to share that with my child someday, but also knowing at that point he was not my child, he was her child, and he might not ever be my child. So also at that time I had started writing, I had started a journal for Tate's birth mom, which I still have, which I don't know if I'll ever have the guts to actually give her. But I wrote down all of the details, and I look at it sometimes and I just bawl my eyes out.
Which is a processing thing for you.
Yeah,
for sure.
totally.
And if the time comes, it'll come. But
I
for
hope
you,
that
that's essential. That's
Yeah.
that's an important part of you.
Yeah. So
You asked about getting the phone call. I mean, that was an important story to tell, just because it really softened not the blow, but the shock of like that phone call, that he's being born.
Yeah.
But because just establishing that relationship ahead of time was huge, especially in terms of an open adoption.
So we came home and we're on pins and needles the next 4 weeks waiting for the phone call that he was being born. Got a call from the agency. We had been in communication with Tate's birth mom through text since we matched or were chosen in October. So we were in communication that whole time, but we got a phone call from our agency saying that she was going to be induced that night. So my mom came over to stay with our son, Theo, and I called Trey and he came home and we hopped on a plane and
first plane to Greenville, South Carolina, and we
Yeah.
were there at 10 o'clock.
It was like, yeah, 10. And we got to
PM.
the hospital 11 and walked up. And this was another reason I was so thankful we had the opportunity to meet her beforehand. It was just less awkward when you're in the hospital, you know, with someone who's delivering a baby that you've never met before. So we had already established a relationship with her already. You know, we brought her some snacks and things we knew that she liked, and got to sit with her through the whole labor.
You did.
Yeah, you were in and out, but she labored that night and we got to stay with her and just encourage her and love her and learn more about her. And I will never forget, the conversations that we got to have in those moments, and just the intimate things that she shared with me that I could have never asked for or expected for her to share with me. And
She asked Curb to be with her during the delivery.
yeah, so that was unexpected. Originally in her birth plan, she didn't want us in the room, which I was not obviously opposed to. I understood completely. But we
respecting those boundaries and being
Absolutely.
open to whatever, you know, having that open
Absolutely.
relationship with them.
So I got to be there when he was born, and I got to cut the cord
Oh wow.
and hold him, and I got to see her hold him for the first time, and it's like those images are just like burned in the best way, but like you just never forget that. So we stayed in the hospital with her until she was discharged, and then we were discharged, and we were in South Carolina for 10 days after that. And in those 10 days, we got to spend quite a lot of time with them, which I was so thankful for. It was exhausting.
You could write a book on the experiences in that 10 days.
I mean-
And it was there. We went through a lot of
Within
stuff.
that time, there's still a lot of unknowns.
So, yes. So in South Carolina, consents are signed. I don't actually think there's a time frame,
Okay.
but she signed about a little more than 24 hours after he was born. So we were just waiting to go home at that point, but we wanted to take advantage of that time while we were there, knowing that we live 1,000 miles away. It's not going to be like we get to see you 6 times a year, you know?
Yep.
So we just did things. We went to, it was winter, so we couldn't like go outside. We went to the library and did a few things with them to get to spend time and for them to get to see Tate. Yeah. We went to their house a couple of times. Trey went to their house for spaghetti.
So I said you could write a book on the experiences that
Right.
happened after the 10 days while we were waiting.
That was a funny
That
story,
was
but
just another big one for me of just kind of letting things happen. And
Yeah.
I didn't know what would
Yeah.
happen, but they asked us the day that we stayed one extra night.
no, we were discharged the same day, but it was a couple hours after her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We were still there then. And they had gone home. But then as I'm dropping them off, I took them home. And as I'm dropping them off, they asked me if we'd want to stay for dinner
Yeah.
that night.
And I was like, I've been up for 48 hours
And Tate was
caring for Tate and Tate's birth mom. I am drained. I cannot have another conversation.
But I said yes.
But he said yes.
Spaghetti. I mean, hey.
And so I said yes before I even telling Kirbie about
Yeah.
the story.
So he went.
So I went by myself.
And I was like, I just cannot. And they were so gracious and understanding of why. So Tate and I went to the hotel, and Trey went and ate spaghetti. And they sent him home with leftovers.
yeah,
And it
that
was
was-
like the most
Full
sweet.
circle moment.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
And
just like family.
yeah, it was so.
It was an experience that I would not have normally said yes to, that I would never ever take back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in that moment too, when I left, they thanked us.
Yeah. They had just birthed the baby and gave it to us to raise, and they were thanking us. And there's been so many moments like that where we were like, what a gift it is to have that relationship. And yeah, it's uncomfortable. I mean, there are moments that are definitely uncomfortable for both them and for us. But the fact that we and they lay it down and say this, we believe this is what's best for Tate, and we want to do it, and we want to love each other well through the awkward and the uncomfortable, is a gift.
not every situation is that.
No, it's
and
not.
That's a big thing to say, is that everybody's experience is not going to be that.
But I think
we
you
got
guys,
very lucky with that. And
you guys
just
being willing to
being
have
willing
those,
to be open from the start is a big proponent. And
And
in
it's
there.
amazing. I remember listening to Ashley Mitchell talk about her open relationship and how her son like has overnights with them. And I'm like, no way, that will never happen. I mean, we were obviously not there, but when we just had our last visit, we all stayed together in a 2-bedroom condo. If you would have told me that 2 years ago, I would have been like, no way, that's so weird. It was the best weekend. I mean, we just played Uno and we like watched cartoons and we made breakfast together. It was so natural and organic, and I could have never expected that and never would have been open to that 2 years ago. But just watching the way that the relationship has progressed and knowing that that's going to continue, or hoping that that's going to continue.
but it's okay regardless of if it does happen, if it doesn't happen. That initial just openness
Yes,
is just the
being
constant
willing.
theme of this, is just being willing, being open. But it's okay initially to kind of have your reservations, because that's healthy and that's normal. But then letting God be the one to open the proper doors in
Yes.
the right situations.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure.
So looking back at the whole story, couples watching, beginning that process, what's something that has just like stood out to you? If you could just put the whole story in just 2 words. I already know it's going to be, so that's why I'm out there.
There's only 2 words.
Well, and then just give some encouragement to couples watching. What would you say?
So, all throughout our adoption, this was not planned, but it just kind of happened. Ephesians 3:20 showed up everywhere. It was another God thing, like just everywhere on our social media accounts, in the sermons at church, in different songs, just insane amount of places this showed up. And Ephesians 3:20, the theme of it is immeasurably more. And that kind of became our anchor, like knowing it, if we weren't chosen for a situation, it was because God had immeasurably more for us. Or just constantly thinking about that as the theme for our adoption. We use that for the t-shirts that we made to fundraise. We used it for everything, and it continues to be our family's kind of life verse today. Even 2 years later, we use it for everything. So
finding that anchor, finding that kind of holding point between you and your spouse if you're considering adoption, as well as just having the conversations, the tough conversations, the real ones, and finding more resources on researching adoption if that's how you want to, if that's where you want to go. Going to the BATA conference, talking to anybody that is affiliated with BATA will help. So just finding more information if that's...
And going to, God's Word.
Right.
Like that truth of God's Word. God's Word says it's living and active, and here God gave you something from His Word that you guys are able to still go back and hold on to that truth. It's really powerful.
in every season, in every situation, it's not just adoption specific. For
sure.
Thank
you so much for joining us.
Thanks
you
for
guys,
having us.
for being vulnerable and just sharing your story with us. It's been an encouragement even just now. So we're definitely excited to see God continue to work in your sons' lives and in your lives, and just educating and doing what God has called you to do.
Thank you. This is a blast.
Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and head to beautymisstheashes.com to learn more about our organization. And we'll see you next time on the Beauty Miss the Ashes podcast.